Welcome, everyone. We're back to today's episode of the Lighthouse Sessions. And I swear Tom didn't know this coming in, but Tom Gay and I, we've been friends for a long time, and he very appropriately rearranged the art in his house so that we have a nautical theme. No, it was there before. But Tom, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about you and how you would say you qualify as a visionary entrepreneur, because you are one of the most visionary I know.
Wow. Well, thank you. I think that's a good thing, Jeff. At least it's the kind of coat that I wear, the coat of an entrepreneur. And here we are in April of 2025, and I've been building companies since the mid 70s. I've actually started 7 companies, and they have one thing in common. And that one thing, I'll tell you the one thing right now, but all of them have the same attribute, and that is you start out with identifying a problem. Okay. When you understand the problem, and you can find a solution, what you're looking for is the kind of problem that more than one person has. When you see that, now you have the ability to create a system that you can turn into a business. And if there are enough people with that problem and your system does solve it and it's efficient, for each new person you solve it for, the contribution to the bottom line of that solution increases. We call that operating leverage.
Yeah.
So we always look for challenges that we could solve, that we could then apply. In these days, we apply technologies to those. And I use the word plural, technologies, because back in the olden days, we applied technology, but it was sort of like, pick and shovel compared to today.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, that underlying principle or focus helped me create 7 companies. And here today, I'll share right up front. I don't know how much you may understand this, Jeff, but I started my 7th company at age 77 2 years ago.
That is good numbers. If you look at numerology, you were clearly meant to do that, right?
Exactly. And it's been an adventure. It's been fun. Lived all over the world, solved all kinds of challenges for people. And today it's just a joy to be doing it all over again, using today's technologies applied against long-term traditional challenges that people in the marketplace have.
And I think I want to pull out a couple of things, and we're going to get into more of your philosophy. The key things I want to point out is I don't know a single entrepreneur who hasn't had at least 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 businesses. And what I find fascinating is when you talk to an entrepreneur, every single business came from a problem they or somebody they knew well had, and they tried to find a solution. And when they couldn't find one, they just, being stubborn, they solved it themselves and said, oh, I can make a living off this. But the part that also fascinates me is, again, we were talking about this before we officially started recording. A lot of people think the world of being an entrepreneur is smooth sailing. And Tom, you were commenting that, the things we can guarantee, there's going to be some rough waters. There's going to be some storms. We're going to have days where it's too calm and we're trying to sail and not getting anywhere. I think what also separates entrepreneurs is we're stubborn and we're resilient in equal parts.
Yes. Stubborn and resilience. Isn't that the recipe? Well, the reality is we are driven, and as I've said, if I'm in with both feet. We're going for it, and we're going to break a wall down to get to it if it is worth working for.
Yeah.
Now it's got to be worth working for. And I don't mean financially. Yeah, that's part of why we do these things, but it's really got to have a value, got to have an impact, got to be meaningful to people, got to solve something worth solving. You know, it goes back to so much of one's finding their purpose in life, and that is to have a vision and a mission worth pursuing.
Yeah.
And I've been lucky enough and blessed enough to have come across those and to have the experience of one birth the idea and the start of the successive ones that came after that.
Yeah. And I think that's the other thing about entrepreneurs. We might as well share the good and the bad. Once we've solved a problem, then we're bored and we're like, okay, what else can we do?
Well, I'll tell you a story. I built a company in the 80s. I started it in 79, sold it in 89, stayed with the acquirer, an NYSE firm. At the time of selling it, we were about 80 million in revenue, 350 people. Clearly a big company bought us. Now, I was their kept entrepreneur, as I like to say it. Okay. Now, just so people know what that means, there's not a lot of intrapreneuring, even though companies say we're always creating stuff. Well, the pressure on the inside is to not take the risk. So because they bought my company and I was the wild man on the leadership team, I became the kept entrepreneur. True story. They would send companies by me to serve as an example of how an entrepreneur could live inside this big company. They would send business plans by me. There are some household name companies, big ones today, who back in those days weren't big, but have become household names. I can't share them out for privacy reasons. They sent them by me. They were looking at possibly buying them, and they needed a witness that they would be a good company to be the acquirer. Okay.
And that's the thing, for what it's worth, Tom, I worked it into it, and I was lucky enough to go down to their office in California. And what fascinated me was that Scott Cook, the founder of Intuit, his kitchen table was immortalized in its own little private nook to reflect that, we are a multi-billion-dollar company, but we came from this kitchen table.
Isn't that beautiful?
And everybody was like, oh, and on over all the other stuff. And I'm like, tell me more about this kitchen table. Like, it just, I didn't know why it was so important, but seeing it, I could tell that it was part of the heritage. It was an important piece of culture.
It's part of the symbolism of where good things come from.
Yeah.
And, in my case with this company that made, I kind of got tired of the bureaucracy quickly. One of the business plans that they sent by me that I told them, this is a great idea. You should go invest in this. A week after resigning, I called these guys who wrote the business plan and asked, did you get your money? Which they hadn't.
Yeah.
Okay. Those were the days of the 80-page business plans. I said, okay, let's do it. So within a week of leaving, I had another company. I was now the one writing the check and leading the charge. Well, we ended up taking that company public about 6 years later.
Yeah.
Did the NASDAQ dance and then sold that to another New York Stock Exchange company a couple of years after that. So it just is, there's a spark that happens when the chemistry of the problem and the chemistry of the people come together. And it led to something that absolutely changed the real estate and insurance industry up through today. I sold that one 25 years ago. So
I love it. Now let's fast forward to 2 years ago. And again, this is what I love about Tom. Number one, he is truly one of us. He's a visionary entrepreneur. I'm going to guess at 77, you got a lot of advice saying you can't, you shouldn't, take up golfing. What triggered you at the age of 77, the young age of 77, to say, I got some gas in the tank left?
great question. So I've come out of a setting where I was doing networking meetings. I was leading them. They were in-person meetings. COVID hit. As we all know, it changed our lives. All of our networking went virtual. I've been a Zoom user since 2015. It was part of my username in 2015. This is 6-7 years before COVID. So we went to Zoom and I was already familiar with it. And a dear friend of mine from one of my previous companies, a client, called me on the phone and said, Tom, I go to all these Zoom meetings. And everyone says, save the chat. And I saved the chat and I can't do a damn thing with it.
Yeah, it's like, so what? I saved it, now what?
And his words were, would you fix this? Now, he was a friend. It was a problem. He gave me the challenge, would you fix it? And in 3 months, we had a product that fixed it, and fixed it unlike anything anyone ever expected. It became a product and one of the flagships of my current new company. Well, when we fixed it and started sharing it with people, 2 things happened. One is people loved it, and it just grew very rapidly globally. And number 2, AI came along and started tinkering with all those Zoom records that you have and fell way short of what they should have been doing that we had already solved a year or so earlier. So it became clear that we had a very innovative and scalable product. And it's now grown globally. It continues to expand. And more recently, we've just integrated it into one of the world's largest marketing systems. And today is the first official day of its release of this product as an integration into Go High Level for the use of Go High Level subscribers and agencies to be able to get the power of Zoom networking and get the results that people want when they go to a networking meeting and bring them into their communications and sales processes. I haven't shared the name of this. I know you'll bug me to share it, but nevertheless, you start out with, Tom, would you fix this? And you go, okay, let's get into what this is and why it works or why it's important. And now what could we do and what technologies are available? And, I don't code. Haven't ever written a line of code, but I know how to work with, products and markets and tech people. And now we've got a whole new world opening up, just because, like we entrepreneurs, we're like that dog that bites onto your back of your leg and just holds on and figures it out.
Yeah. And I love that. And for the record, I'm not going to bug you to share the name, because I feel like if people want to know the name, they should bug you themselves. But you may share the name, but I feel like if people want it, they need to reach out. random and weird coincidence, I have several friends who are high level agencies, but I also know somebody on the Go High Level development team. Um, I feel like you and he would need a connection, so let me make that happen.
I'd love to meet them, Jeff. And I've kind of stayed away from high level because it's in its space and I'm in my space. And then the market came at me and said, you know, you're doing everything but helping us, in
Yep.
effect. And it's sort of like,
Well,
make it work.
for what it's worth, and I'm just going to share that I went down the rabbit hole of Go High Level, and I realized that I can easily get addicted to new software. So for my own mental health, I said, whoa, I'm not going to be the guy who knows how to use Go High Level. I just found a couple friends and said, okay, you're my Go High Level people, because I spent 6 weeks learning everything about Go High Level, and I went, no, Jeff's talents lie elsewhere. Jeff should be talking to people, not learning software. And it's funny because I looked at Zoom, and you and I are so similar. I looked at Zoom and I was like, I know a lot of networkers who just accept Zoom as it is. And then I started looking at the development, and for anybody out there, entrepreneurs that don't necessarily want to start from scratch, look at the big companies and say, what are their friction points? Because and people think I'm crazy, but I'm naive enough to believe that I'm going to solve problems, and this is where Jeff's going. I'm focusing solely on the Google ecosystem. And it's not to say that I think I'm smarter than Google. It's just I know the small business owners, the less than 10 trillion in revenue that they seem to want to serve, but without serving. I recognize that you might be doing $1 million a year in revenue and not big enough that Google cares about you, but you have a problem that could be solved by somebody who's good at solving problems.
Yeah.
And the old me, I used to think, okay, now I need to learn how to code. Nope. Now I just need to go to my network and say, okay, who knows how to code? Who knows how to do this? And I'm learning to sit in my space as the weirdo who asks all the strange questions. And, let's see what we can build out of this.
The interesting thing, I want to contradict you in a positive way.
Perfect.
Okay. As you described that, the weirdo who asks the questions, that's always the best place to begin.
Oh, God, that's where I want to live, breathe. And by the way, weirdo is a source of pride in my house. So
keep it, man. It's good.
I got called it enough, Tom. I figured I'm just going to claim it and take the power of it.
Need to get you a T-shirt with that on it.
I was going to get a hat, but yes.
But what you signal there is it's the question. It's not the answer. It's the question. And if you don't ask the right question, you're never going to get to the answer that you need.
Yeah.
And I'm a very active user of AI. I love it because it's in my sweet spot.
We were born to play with AI. I swear, we're just born early, but we were there for it. So.
Absolutely. But the whole secret to AI is asking the right question.
Yeah.
Because the knowledge is there, the tools are there. You may have to put a couple of them together, which is not a big deal.
Yeah.
But if you learn to ask the right questions, you can move the world.
Well, and you mentioned specifically, you talk about technologies, plural. I'm obsessed with questions, plural. And, for what it's worth, I suspect most visionary entrepreneurs can relate to this. As a kid, my teacher would say, anybody questions, anybody but Jeff. They were quick to tell me to put my hand down. And, it's funny because as an adult, people tell me all the time, why isn't a good question? Because it shuts people down. And I'm like, why is what opens up my world? Like when I heard about the Toyota 5 Ys, I was like, I don't know this Toyota person, but I love him. I admire him. He's my new hero because he just kept asking why until they found out what the real problem was.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Well, you have to ask why, you know, as you've read the book, Start with Why.
Yep. That's Simon Sinek is another one of my favorite people, because if it's not an important why, I don't care what the answer is, period. You can talk to me about how all day long or what you do, but if I don't care about the why, we don't need to have a 5-second conversation, let alone a 5-hour.
Yeah. Yeah. When you get to the why, you're now getting to the vision and the purpose. So I'm with you.
And one of the things I love personally about AI, and you and I are going to have a deeper conversation just about AI another time, but literally we have access to all of the wisdom of humanity. And I don't want to get called out for being blasphemous, but every now and then I'll do my very technical and I'll figure out how to do something, and I'll figure out, how do I delegate? Who can help me with this? But believe it or not, when I'm building my user experience, I always ask, what would Jesus do?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's funny because people get mad at me for that. And I'm like, isn't that literally what we should do, is ask, the best of us, what would they do for, because I personally hate the math around, the cost of acquiring a new client. And yet we don't pay attention to the clients we already have.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's a worthwhile question. And to ask that, my values are baked into my companies and my products. They always have been.
Yeah.
And I believe you have to go back to, finding a cause worth pursuing.
Yeah.
And when you bring in the question that you did, what would Jesus do? You're in pursuit of the problem worth solving, the cause worth pursuing, the justice that may need to be enabled or supported. Most people don't know that I took an 8-year sabbatical. I moved to South Africa with my wife. We started a ministry taking care of children with HIV, children trapped in poverty, children trapped in abuse. We ended up, when we left, when we were there, we built a company. It's also called an NGO, nonprofit ministry, but it was organized like a company.
Yeah.
And we were feeding 7,000 kids every single day.
Wow.
And organizations around the world sending containers of food that we turned into meals. And we left a leadership team of South Africans who this year will hit their 25th anniversary leading
Wow.
but the whole point is it became something, and here's back to entrepreneuring. It becomes something that you can not do.
Yep. Well, and I want to touch on that for a second, Tom, because I hear a lot of people say, here's my philanthropy, here's my business, never shall the two meet. And it's like, but to me, business is philanthropy and philanthropy is business. Like, if you do both right, the world should be a greater place because of it. Is that it seems like that would resonate with you.
Oh, very much so. I learned that the marketplace is a ministry.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you pursue it with the values and the energy, then you're going to make an impact. You're going to cause something to be different. And to me, there was nothing greater than seeing these 3 girls, they were about 16, trapped in poverty, looking to find a way out. And to sit down with them at a table and say, well, what's your dream? Now, no one ever asks people in those conditions to dream.
Yeah.
So what's your dream? If you could have a magic wand and wave it, where would you like to be in 5 years or 10 years?
Yeah.
And once you get that coming out, we're back to the vision, the why. Now we could do the things to put them on a track where they accomplished it. And as we used to say, we'll give them a hand up. We're not going to give them a handout.
Yeah.
Handouts don't work. For anyone listening to this, handouts do not work. hand up does, and that became a motto in our work in this organization.
Well, it's funny, Tom, because I won't name the organization. I don't want to hurt their feelings, but I had a nonprofit reach out that basically teaches high school and university kids entrepreneurial skills. And they asked if I'd be willing to make a financial donation. And my answer was, hell no. Why would I do that to you? And they're like, wait, what? And I said, no, I don't want to give you a handout. And I don't know where I got the language from. I feel like it was probably something you told me a long time ago. I was like, can we figure out how I can give you a hand up? And it just fascinated me. And again, this is not a judgment of them, but the entire non-profit organization had this poverty mindset of, we need to go to the successful entrepreneurs, and they really had a very successful alumnus program where they're asking their alumni to donate money. And I was like, wouldn't it be better if you asked them to invest in the projects or bring them in as investors, and then a portion of proceeds from the new business goes to the charity, a portion goes to the investor, a portion goes to the founder. And they're like, nope, that's not how we work. And I was just like, wow. Like I offered to build a business. I was going to donate the business to them. And they said, we're nonprofits. We don't know how to run the business. And I'm like, and yet you do what now?
Well,
sometimes it's hard to keep my mouth shut.
Yeah, no, I totally appreciate what you said. I had a similar experience in my last software company. We had a tool that helped, let's just say, helped our clientele get new clients.
Yeah.
So we brought it into this nonprofit, a very well-known nonprofit that works in high schools across the nation. And I had been writing checks for years in support, and I said, hey, no, let me give you this tool and teach you how to use this tool that is used in the marketplace by people to get more clients. In your case, you're going to use it to get more donors.
Yeah.
So it turns out a wonderful story. We sponsored 11 of their local city leaders to use it, and they only used the business development tool for donor development for major donors. In 1 year, they went from 60 major donors. A major donor in their case was donating $10,000 a year or more. In their first year, they went from 60 using this tool to 130. In their second year, they went over 300. 300 people in these 11 communities donating $10,000 a year or more. So you're now, I don't know what the or more went up to. They could have been a 20 or 50 or whatever. However, they went from 600,000 at minimum to 3 million in 2 years by simply following the steps that people use to grow the business.
Yeah.
Well, as that turned out, it multiplied across 110 of their communities across the U.S. And all of a sudden, they're funding programs that came because the people wanted to support the causes.
Yeah.
And so, but it's so rare. Most cases, the nonprofit just goes, well, that's not how we do things.
Yeah. Well, and it's fascinating to me. I think personally, one of the hardest things to do is to ask a stranger to give you money for your cause. And yet, wouldn't it be nice to have friends? Like I love, and by the way, I'm a big nutty fan of PBS. I personally think it is the most brilliant philanthropy model on the planet. We've got the people who enjoy the shows. Why don't we ask them to donate and become regular sponsors rather than a one-off?
Yeah, I agree with you. And they put some real specials together and special artists and programs, and they draw the crowds. They draw their A-list, if you will.
Well, and it's fascinating because the actors, they get to come up from, it's kind of funny, they get to come up from behind the camera to be behind the camera. And I love meeting the characters, the actors who play the characters. And my wife was obsessed with Downton Abbey. I loved watching the commercials, like, because to me it was like, this is philanthropy at its finest. You've got Laura Linney or Paul Cummings would come out, or cast from the show, and they'd talk about what it was like to film the show, and more importantly, here's where your dollars go, here's what you're doing. And I'm going to spin this because, back in the 80s, you couldn't watch television without Sally Struthers coming on, and, that guilt trip of, these kids are going to starve to death without you.
Mhm.
Again, handouts don't work. Let's solve the problems once and for all, not, and that was always the part that was hard for me, is, okay, I sponsor and I feed this kid for a month. Number one, I know how much overhead is going into most projects
Sure.
like that.
Yeah.
But it's like, what happens when that kid grows up, and they graduate out of the program and they're no longer getting any handouts? I've actually maybe made them less self-reliant, and
Yeah. Yeah.
or I've only given enough to keep them alive. I haven't given them a life.
Well, there's an underlying principle that I embrace and share around what you described, and using the PBS example. And that principle is birds of a feather flock together.
Yeah.
So if you want people to support your cause, great. If you find the people who already support your cause, like PBS viewers, they likely live across the street from people like themselves.
Yeah.
They're in the same clubs. The kids go to the same schools. They have the same habits, vacations, go to the same restaurants. They're in the Rotary or the Kiwanis or whatever. Birds of a feather do flock together. So get the birds dancing together by how you call them to relationships.
Yeah.
That's what created the success that my example illustrated a few minutes ago. And that's the PBS model. Get more of those PBS loving birds to understand that they're the reason why this is working.
Yeah. And I think the magic happens, number one, when you bring corporate mindset into philanthropy. But number two, when you bring the people impacted by the philanthropy into that community. I think, it's, one of my other favorites, and I don't know what it says about me that I have favorite nonprofits, but Ronald McDonald House has meant a lot to me in my life. I had a nephew, my sister had to stay there, and if not for the option, she would have been not able to be there when her child needed her. But I'm obsessed with the model. And between you and me, I think, they have the luxury, they're a blue chip charity, but they could do so much more with their community.
Yeah, I don't know them well, but I agree with the cause. Absolutely. The cause is wonderful.
Yeah.
And enabling it and allowing it to magnify, to me, is what should happen. If it's not, it's lost opportunity.
Yeah. And I mean, it's an amazing charity, but again, with COVID, and this is something I've heard in other places, pre-COVID, all of what they do is they make meals for the family staying in the I'll call it a hotel, the house. Volunteers came in and would cook dinner for the families. And then during COVID, they couldn't get clearance for that. So then they had to purchase all of their food. And, it shifted their priorities.
Mm.
And now they're back to donors are coming in, they'll get a corporate sponsor who comes in once a month and makes dinner for the families. But it's just a weird little thought, but I've seen this in action. And wouldn't it be nice if the kids, when they leave the hospital, leave the hospice, leave that setting, just draw a little card saying thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know if they do, but in this case, I know of some corporate sponsors that, they kind of feel like it's, they feel good for a day, a month, and then the rest of the month they forget that they're there.
Yeah. 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 I again, that's a big shortcoming, because when you fail to keep them engaged, there's slippage, there's retention issues, there's all kinds of challenges, and including ones where the heart of the giver doesn't change, they're somewhere else.
Yeah. And that's the thing. If somebody's giving and they care and they want to keep giving, they will, until you give them a reason not to.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and as you said, they don't stop giving, they just give somewhere else. And
Yeah. Yep. No, you're 100% right. I try to teach this principle to financial advisors, because, in that industry, it's an industry of hunters. You've heard the term hunters versus gatherers.
yeah,
When you're a hunter and you capture something, kill something, you're down the street looking for something else to kill.
next,
Okay.
next.
Next. What do you think happens to the ones that you brought home yesterday or the day before?
Yeah.
What happens is retention dissipates.
Yep.
Somebody else comes in with a better way of maintaining the relationship, and your account starts to slide.
Yep.
Seen it over and over and over again in the financial services fields. So it's the same with causes, and it's human nature,
Yeah.
unfortunately, or the marketplace, or whatever you want to call it.
Yep. Well, and to that, you and I first met in the context. You are my go-to. If somebody has questions about referrals, I'm going to send them your way. I can't help but thinking, and by the way, most of the language in the sales world, it doesn't end well for the prey, as it were. It's always you eat what you kill. Like, it's very, very predatory. But I think, and I don't want to put words in your mouth because I want to hear it straight from you. If you're in an industry where you value relationships, you can be that farmer and keep getting the repeat harvests. Is that a fair comment?
It is very good. Excellent comment. I did a blog a few weeks back, and then I turned it into a video, one of these AI guy things. And it addressed the question of why 80 to 90% of financial advisors fail and leave the business in their first year. And there's 5 reasons in the video. And the whole point is all around what we've been talking about, or the causes all around what we're talking about. And that is their inability to stay in the game relationally with people. Because if you solve a financial problem for me and stay in the game with me, I'm going to tell my neighbor, I'm going to tell my children or my parents or my brother-in-law, whatever.
Yeah.
And if you don't, then, well, there's another industry that's rife with that. And I'm not saying this to try to insult anyone, but let's go to the real estate marketplace. Residential real estate. I have a deep, deep background in that area.
Yep.
90% of the people who buy or sell their home leave the transaction happy with their real estate agent on either side. Survey says happy. Now, I don't know about the 10%. Let's stay on the 90%.
Yeah.
Okay. 11% of the buyers ever hear from their real estate agent after the deal is done. Now, what does that mean? When their neighbors are thinking of moving to Florida, retiring, and going to Arizona, they're not going to talk to that agent who helped them. The agents who helped them have gone on to the next hunting ground,
Yeah.
and they've left this enormous band of happy people behind them who, if they only stayed in touch relationally.
Yeah.
Now that has a definition too, by the way, that's distinctly different than sending out what's just listed cards.
Or those god awful calendars.
Yeah, there you go.
You know, Tom, I'm going to tell you about one of my favorite realtors. And this is in a city I would far away, but a friend of mine told me about it. This realtor picked a neighborhood. It happens to be the most affluent neighborhood in the city. And what she did was she went around and she asked everybody in the neighborhood who they use for trades, who they use for whatever. And she compiled a list of trusted vendors. And everybody said, "Oh, you're crazy. This will never work." But whenever she got a new listing or whenever she was showing a house, she gave people this little catalog. And it was just, apparently it's hard to find a good pool person and a good maid in the same neighborhood. But by building those relationships, and it was weird because she asked nothing of the trades, but people started saying, "Oh, so-and-so told me I need to call you to come in and fix my hot tub." And before she knew it, she was getting referrals from the trades of the people in that neighborhood.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And it was just, this was in, as the world was sliding into COVID, and people are like, "Oh, high-end houses aren't selling." And she's like, "I don't see that at all." It's.
Yeah. No, that is one of the magic formulas for success in her business or his business.
Yeah.
Totally agree. I as I say, I've been around this field for 25 years, and in a marketplace, this is something that's even broader. If you're in a business where you have competition and a challenge standing out, the question you have to answer is, what can you do to make yourself outstanding and stand out?
Yep.
If you answer those two questions, you'll tip the scales in your favor of how you get new clients, how you get new business. You will flip them in your favor. Now, most people won't do that. They won't do that. And
most people will pay for more advertising. They'll try to get louder on social media. But honestly, and I think what I know of you, it's, let's look internally and find new ways to add value.
Yeah. I talked with a young man in Texas recently. He's in his first year in insurance, spending $90 a day, 90 a day on Facebook ads, getting a little business. However, he's got 20% of his new clients leaving every month.
Ouch.
Think about that. So in 5 months, he's out of clients if he stopped.
If he stopped paying, the overlords.
All it would take is a little change in the formula. He could probably save $90 a day too.
Yeah.
And yet, he read a book somewhere or whatever
somebody told him, you need to do this, you need to do that. And
yeah, it doesn't work that way.
Tom, I'm going to share my last pet peeve because I will really want to hear your response to this. A lot of people, I say I'm 100% referral based, and a lot of people respond and go, "Oh, you must be broke and your business can't be scalable." What would you say to that? I have my own response, but I want to hear yours.
Well, I can only share my own experience with it. Okay. This is a true story. When my wife and I returned from overseas, we were there for 8 years. We moved to Boise, Idaho. I was the CEO at that time of had been the CEO of 4 different companies. So I knew a little bit about CEOing, if you will. I started a CEO consulting practice to people in Boise, Idaho, business owners, I didn't know a single business person in Boise when we moved there, not one. Had a personal friend, no business.
Yeah.
I did the usual things that people do. Back in those days, hire a telemarketer to set up appointments, get a brochure to send out via direct mail. $20,000 later, I had one client. Okay, one client paying me about $800 a month. I said, Tom, stop. You've led the largest training company in North America on referral marketing 10 years earlier. You were the CEO of it. Just go use what you know worked. In 18 months later, I had 31 clients.
Yeah.
Okay, 31 clients. One of those clients, they all became friends, by the way, because that's what you do when you do relationship selling.
Yep.
One of those clients put me on a retainer and paid me $20,000 a month for my CEOing help with him. He paid me that for 4 years.
Yeah.
Think about that. Nearly $1 million just because relationship came first. And we ended up taking a marginally successful business over 100 million in revenue and turning it into an enormously successful business. So he had a great ROI on what it was that he was sharing with me. But the whole point is it all came by relationship.
Yeah.
Now, I haven't lived in that area for 8 years now. Moved away to be near grandchildren. I still get calls from people.
Yeah.
Still get text messages. Still get Facebook messages from the people that were in relationship with me. So, Jeff, stay with it. Those people who tell on you you must be starving are wrong.
Yeah.
I want to say they're off base. They're wrong.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, I'm going to correct you in a good way. They are 100% correct because I know they don't value relationships. Therefore, it wouldn't work for them.
Yeah. Well,
and that's a no-brainer. You and I, we are birds of a feather. We flock together. I just want to point out that whenever I launch something new, first thing I do is reach out and say, hey, Tom, what's going on in your world? And Tom does the same. So, Tom, we are going to run out of time here. Where can people go to connect with you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm a heavy email user. I'll respond to everyone's email if they simply don't try and spam me. So I do share my email if that's appropriate here, and that's tom@engagepro.com. And I have to say, if you look at the word EngagePro, it's my company name. And if you look at LinkedIn, pretty soon you're going to see LinkedIn and EngagePro linked up in a whole new way. And I won't turn it into any more of a commercial than that, but come and find out more if you'd like to build a relationship.
I love it. And for what it's worth, Tom, I think you've given enough value. You're more than welcome to say, here's what I do professionally.
Yeah.
So thank you for hanging out with me, and thank you for sharing, as always, your amazing insights and wisdom.
Well, I'll have to be honest with you, Jeff. If it were just you and I alone, it would have been a joy in and of itself. So if this helps anyone else, all the better.